So let's talk about all this. With us now, former National Security Advisor Dr. Zbigniew Brzezinski, whose conversations with Brent Scowcroft on the future of American foreign policy can be found in their new book, America in the World. And Dr. Brzezinski, Dad, welcome. I turn you over to my illustrious panel because I will not interview you. Good morning, though.
Good morning. Dr. Brzezinski, I want to start. You're a member of an exclusive club of national security advisors to presidents. A couple of questions. One, talk about the importance of a cohesive relationship between a national security advisor and a Secretary of State. And I'm curious what you know about Jim Jones and what kind of relationship he will have with Madam Secretary of State Hillary Clinton.
Well, first of all, the cohesive relationship has to be between the President and the National Security Advisor. And I'm not saying this because I held that position, but because the National Security Advisor works so intimately with the President. He's the person who sees him very early in the morning. He's the one who keeps him informed. He's the one who alerts him to issues. He's the one who sticks his head into the President's office several times a day. So the President and he really have to have a close professional relationship. Of course, the President in charge, but the National Security Advisor often acting as his alter ego. Secondly, you have to take into account the fact that the President is swamped, literally swamped by a paper flow addressed to him from the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the Director of Central Intelligence. And these papers are allegedly destined for the President. But he can't read them all. He just doesn't have the time for that. So the National Security Advisor has to process that. The National Security Advisor has to have a working relationship with the Secretary of State, the Defense, CIA, and hopefully work in unison, sharing a similar perspective. Coordinate that policy. But the leadership really has to come from the President if that system is to function.
So you're saying the relationship, the relationship order, President and NSA need to be cohesive, but it does sound like that it's important that Jim Jones and Hillary Clinton, in this case, have a better relationship, frankly, than even the President and the Secretary of State, that it's the Jones-Clinton nexus that is going to be more important in some ways than the Obama-Clinton.
That's right. And it's also a question very much of who, in a sense, initiates and shapes the strategy, the overall policy. The Secretary of State will be very busy. The Secretary of State has to travel an enormous amount, often is away from the capital for a long period of time because of lengthy trips abroad.
Right.
So who shapes policy? Who makes the basic decisions? And here again, there is a kind of symbiotic relationship between the President and the National Security Advisor. The National Security Advisor has to integrate the sometimes conflicting views of the Secretary of State or the Secretary of Defense. He has to present options to the President so that the President, with the National Security Council at his side, then evaluates, assesses the options, and makes the ultimate decisions. So, in a sense, there is a kind of critical role for the National Security Advisor in helping the President make decisions and then in supervising, coordinating the implementation of these decisions.
Dad, Mike Barnacle has a question for you. Mike.
Dr. Brzezinski, clearly the precarious state of the Russian economy bodes ill for the economic ills in our global economy. What do you see over the next year in terms of the United States' relationship with Russia, given the state of the economy in both countries? What does this have to do? What does it tell us about potentially the future of our national security relationship with Russia?
Well, let's keep in mind something very fundamental here, namely the massive disproportion between the global importance of the two economies. The American economy accounts for something like 25% to 30% of the global GDP. The Russian economy for only about 3%. In other words, what happens to our economy is central to the condition of the global economy. What happens to the Russian economy is marginal to what happens to the global economy. That's point one. Point two, until recently, Putin and his leadership thought they were eating their oats. They thought they were riding high. And they were snickering at our economic difficulties, pointing out that in contrast, they're doing very well. And then lo and behold, they learned the painful truth. Namely, they're interdependent with the global economy, and more than we, and more vulnerable than we. You know, our stock market dropped by what, 30%, 35%? Theirs by 65%. There's been a significant outflow of capital from Russia. The ruble has plunged downwards. The dollar, surprisingly, is getting stronger. The world knows that global economic recovery will come if America recovers. And if we don't, there will not be a global economic recovery. Whether Russia recovers or not depends on the intelligence of Russian policy and the degree to which the Russian leaders recognize something that's absolutely new in Russian history. Namely, that Russia, in fact, is interdependent with the global economy and vulnerable if it doesn't do well. So, to make a long story short, my point is that I think we'll find the Russians more amenable, more willing to accommodate, because they've had a painful lesson in the new global realities.
Yeah. And then just a lesson for our panel, there will be no interrupting cow with my father, just so you know. Mike Barnacle.
I didn't that at dinner.
And Dr. Brzezinski, Mika was lecturing us. We're all jumping in.
Dad, Dylan Radigan from CNBC has a question for you.
Dr. Brzezinski, what, in a sentence, what would you suggest the guiding foreign policy philosophy for the new administration should be?
Well, in general, what I would say is that it has to originate with Obama and it has to be identified with him, because he is right now the hope, the universal hope. I mean, the enthusiasm for him worldwide is enormous, and they expect from him a rather different American foreign policy from the one that we have had in recent years. And there could be some worry, perhaps exaggerated worry abroad, that he may be outsourcing diplomacy to the Department of State, with a very able new Secretary of State who, however, has disagreed with him on some fundamental foreign policy issues. And he may be outsourcing defense policy to a very able, very good, whom I know very well, Secretary of Defense, who, however, may have somewhat different views, whether on missile defense or on new nuclear weapons or on the pace of withdrawals. So the President has to demonstrate that there is no outsourcing, that he is in charge. And I think the best way for him to do that is in the near future, after he's got his economic team in place, after he has kind of created some degree of domestic confidence, that he addresses the world in very broad terms, perhaps through a very major interview in print, in which he would outline his basic philosophy and the general thrust of what he plans to do after he assumes office. And that would mean, 1, how to deal with Europe, 2, how to enlarge the global circle of decision makers, 3, how to engage the new major powers, notably China, perhaps Russia, but is accommodating, and last but not least, how does he pacify that huge region east of Egypt, west of India, in which we're becoming increasingly bogged down.
Just a few things.
Yeah, how do you do that?
I mean, really.
That's just a one-term plan.
Yeah.
You can do it all in one term.
Dr. Brzezinski, stay with us. You'll hang around for a while, and we'll bring you back, because I know we didn't get Mark Halperin to have a question.
Somebody.
Well, I'm going to keep him on if you don't
Did you see how well behaved Mark?
You guys are so much better well-behaved when my father is involved.